You're no longer family. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed heavy, final, like a judge's gavel striking wood. It was raining that night. Not the soft kind. Not the gentle rhythm that lulls a house to sleep. This rain struck the windows like thrown gravel, sharp and relentless, as if the sky itself had chosen a side. The living room lights were dim, one lamp flickering near the corner sofa, casting long distorted shadows across the polished hardwood floor. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something colder. Something metallic. Daniel stood in the center of the room he had grown up in. The same room where birthday candles once flickered. The same room where Christmas mornings glowed warm and golden. Now it felt unfamiliar. Hostile. His suitcase lay half-zipped at his feet, clothes folded with the careful precision of someone trying to control at least one thing. His mother stood near the fireplace. Back straight. Arms folded. Her wedding ring catching the light every time her fingers tightened against her sleeve. She had perfected that stance over the years, the posture of moral superiority. "You embarrassed us," his father said. His voice was low. Controlled. Too controlled. Daniel swallowed. His mouth tasted like copper. For telling the truth? The silence that followed was not empty. It was loaded. Dangerous. The rain filled it, tapping against glass like impatient fingers. 3 weeks earlier. A banquet hall glowing in soft chandeliers. Applause echoing off high ceilings. The Hayes Family Outreach Foundation had just announced record-breaking donations. Cameras flashed. Smiles were wide and rehearsed. Daniel remembered the spreadsheet on his laptop later that night. The numbers that didn't align. The missing funds disguised as administrative adjustments. He remembered asking his father quietly at first, "Is this a mistake?" His father's jaw had tightened then too. "Drop it." But Daniel didn't drop it. He asked again at the next board meeting. Not accusatory. Just persistent. Curious. Honest. And that honesty had cost him everything. Back in the present, his mother stepped closer. Her perfume was sharp and floral, suffocating in its sweetness. She didn't shout. She never shouted. She preferred precision. "You think you're righteous," she whispered. "But you're reckless. You have no idea what you've jeopardized." Daniel searched her face for hesitation, for doubt, for love. He found none. His father walked toward the front door and opened it. Cold wind pushed inside instantly, carrying rain and the distant rumble of thunder. It smelled like asphalt and wet earth. "Pack the rest," his father said. "You're done here." Done. As if he were a failed project. A public relations problem. Daniel felt something inside him shift. Not anger yet, not rage. Something quieter. Something breaking. He bent down and zipped the suitcase fully. The sound of the zipper closing felt louder than it should have. Final. Flashback. He was 9 years old. Knees scraped from falling off his bike. Crying on the driveway. His mother had knelt beside him then, brushing dirt from his skin. "We protect this family," she had told him gently. No matter what. He had believed her. Now he understood. Protection had conditions. Daniel lifted the suitcase handle. His hand trembled slightly. Not from weakness, from adrenaline. From disbelief that blood could turn so quickly. As he stepped toward the door, lightning split the sky. For a second, the entire living room flashed white. In that flash, he saw them clearly, not as parents but as people. His father's fear, hidden behind composure. His mother's obsession with reputation, etched into the tightness around her eyes. This wasn't about embarrassment. It was about exposure. And they knew it. Daniel paused at the doorway. Rain soaked the edges of the hardwood floor. "You're protecting yourselves," he said quietly. "Not the family." His father didn't respond. His mother looked away first. That was the answer. He stepped outside. The rain hit his face instantly, cold, relentless, almost cleansing. Within seconds his shirt clung to his skin. The suitcase wheels splashed through puddles as he walked down the driveway. Behind him the front door shut. Not slammed. Closed. Carefully. As if sealing a vault. Halfway down the street Daniel stopped. His chest tightened. Not from the cold but from the realization settling in. He was alone. Completely alone. Or so he thought. Across the street, A dark sedan idled beneath a flickering streetlight. Its windows tinted too heavily to see inside. Engine running. Headlights off. Daniel's breath slowed. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. Thunder rolled again, deeper this time. He forced himself to walk forward, not looking back again. Every step felt heavier than the last, but beneath the grief, beneath the shock, something else stirred. Resolve. They had cast him out to protect a lie. Which meant the lie was bigger than he imagined. And lies that big rarely survive daylight. As Daniel reached the end of the block, the sedan's headlights flickered on briefly, then off. Watching. Waiting. He didn't see the subtle shift inside that car. The faint glow of a phone screen illuminating someone's face. A message being typed. He's out. Sent. Daniel disappeared into the rain, unaware that the night was not just an ending. It was an activation. The storm above him raged louder, wind whipping through trees, bending branches under pressure. Nature itself seemed to strain under unseen tension. Behind the closed door of his childhood home, his mother stood motionless in the hallway. Her hands trembled for just a second before she steadied them. "Did we do the right thing?" she asked quietly. His father didn't hesitate. "We did what we had to." But his eyes lingered toward the window longer than necessary. Outside, Daniel walked without destination. The streetlights cast long shadows that stretched ahead of him like warnings. He didn't know it yet. The rejection was deliberate, strategic, because what he had uncovered was not just financial misconduct. It was connected to names far more dangerous than his own. And by forcing him out, they believed they had neutralized the threat. They were wrong. Because when you tell someone they're no longer family, you remove the last thing holding them back. And Daniel had just been set free. Precise. Deliberate. The sound cut through the apartment like a blade. Daniel had been staring at the ceiling when it came. That single measured knock. Not aggressive. Not hesitant. Intentional. The kind of knock that doesn't ask permission. It announces inevitability. The overhead bulb hummed faintly above him, casting a pale wash of light across cracked white paint. The apartment smelled faintly of dust and stale coffee. A mattress lay directly on the floor, sheets half-tucked. A folding table near the window held his laptop, a chipped mug, and unopened mail he couldn't bring himself to sort. 3 days. 3 days since the door of his childhood home had shut behind him. Another knock. Exactly the same rhythm. Daniel pushed himself up slowly. His back ached from sleeping on the thin mattress. He moved toward the door cautiously, bare feet silent against the cold tile. For a split second, his mind flashed to the black sedan he'd seen the night he left. Was this them? He unlocked the deadbolt, opened the door. Instead, a man in a tailored charcoal suit stood in the dim hallway, posture impeccable, hair silvered neatly at the temples. He held a leather briefcase with both hands, like something ceremonial. "Mr. Daniel Hayes?" the man asked calmly. His voice was smooth, controlled, the kind that belonged in courtrooms and boardrooms. "Yes," Daniel replied, throat dry. "I represent your grandmother's estate." The air shifted. Daniel's fingers tightened on the edge of the door. "My grandmother died 5 years ago." The man gave a slight nod. "Yes. Eleanor Hayes passed away in October, and her will has just been unsealed." Unsealed. The word echoed in Daniel's mind. Behind his eyes, memories surfaced instantly. His grandmother's kitchen. Always warm, always smelling of cinnamon. The ticking of her antique wall clock. The way she would look at him, not through him but at him. As if he were a person separate from the Hayes name. She was the only one who saw you clearly, Daniel thought. The only one who warned you. "May I come in?" the lawyer asked gently. Daniel stepped aside. The man entered with quiet precision, closing the door softly behind him. His polished shoes made faint, controlled sounds against the tile. He did not glance around the sparse apartment, but Daniel felt the silent assessment anyway. The lawyer placed the briefcase on the folding table and clicked it open. The metallic snap sounded louder than it should have. "Your parents were listed as temporary executors," he began. "Under certain conditions." Daniel's jaw tightened. Of course they were. The man removed a thick envelope sealed with a deep blue wax insignia, Eleanor Hayes's crest. Daniel hadn't seen that seal since her funeral. Temporary? Daniel asked carefully. Yes, the lawyer replied. Your grandmother anticipated complications. The envelope was heavier than expected when Daniel took it. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear alone but from something deeper. Hope. And hope he knew was dangerous. He broke the seal. Inside were documents. Property deeds for land he didn't recognize, bank statements showing substantial balances, corporate filings connected to shell companies. Daniel's pulse quickened. Then he saw it. A handwritten letter. Cream paper. Elegant cursive. Unmistakable. His grandmother's handwriting. If you're reading this, it began. They've already turned on you. Daniel exhaled sharply. The room seemed to shrink, walls inching closer. The lawyer stood silently, giving him space. Daniel's eyes moved down the page. I knew they would choose ambition over blood. I raised your father. I know the hunger that lives behind his eyes. And I know the cost of that hunger. Flashback. Daniel at 14, sitting at Eleanor's dining table. She had leaned across the table, lowering her voice. Power, she had whispered, changes people, but it doesn't create who they are. It reveals them. Back in the apartment, Daniel's throat tightened. The letter continued. There are records hidden within the foundation. Records your parents do not know I secured copies of. If the truth must come out, it must come from someone they cannot silence. Daniel swallowed. His eyes reached the final paragraph. Your inheritance is not money alone. It is responsibility. It activates only if you expose the truth about the Hayes Family Outreach Foundation. The words blurred slightly as his vision tightened. Expose the truth. The lawyer cleared his throat softly. There is one more condition, he said. Daniel looked up slowly. If you refuse, the lawyer continued, all assets transfer to a private trust, controlled by your parents. Silence. The hum of the overhead bulb grew louder. Or maybe Daniel's mind amplified it. This isn't just inheritance, Daniel realized. It's leverage. His grandmother hadn't simply left him protection. She had left him a weapon. The lawyer removed another document. These files contain evidence collected quietly over several years, he said. Financial diversions. Partnerships not disclosed. Payments routed through intermediary organizations.
Daniel's heartbeat drummed in his ears. She knew, he whispered. Yes, the lawyer replied calmly. And she feared you would eventually discover it on your own. Daniel felt conflicting currents surge inside him, grief for the woman who believed in him, anger at the parents who discarded him, fear of what this meant. Why wait 5 years? Daniel asked. The lawyer paused. Because your grandmother stipulated the will would remain sealed unless you were formally removed from the family residence. The air turned cold. She had anticipated this exact moment. She had predicted the fracture. Daniel's mind raced. If his parents had known this clause existed, would they have cast him out? Or had they believed they controlled every angle? Outside, thunder rolled again, distant but heavy. Daniel walked to the small window and looked out. The streetlights flickered faintly. A car idled at the far end of the block. Was it coincidence? Or confirmation? Behind him, the lawyer closed the briefcase slowly. I advise caution, he said. The individuals connected to these accounts extend beyond your parents. Daniel turned. How far? The lawyer's expression remained composed. Far enough. A cold realization settled into Daniel's chest. This wasn't just about family betrayal. It was about something larger. Structured. Protected. If he accepted the inheritance, he would be declaring war. If he declined, he would be surrendering truth. The lawyer moved toward the door. I will return in 48 hours for your decision, he said. Understand that once initiated, the process cannot be undone. The door clicked shut behind him. Daniel stood alone in the dim apartment, the envelope clutched in his hand. Rain began tapping lightly against the window again. He unfolded the letter once more, focusing on the final line. I trust you to choose courage over comfort. His chest tightened. 48 hours. Outside, the car at the end of the block slowly pulled away. Daniel didn't notice. But somewhere, someone had just been informed. The will was unsealed. And the game had officially begun. The Hayes Family Outreach Foundation smiling photos, ribbon cuttings, scholarships, cameras flashing. The homepage loaded slowly on Daniel's cracked laptop, the faint whir of its aging fan filling the quiet apartment. The glow of the screen painted his face in pale blue light, sharpening the
exhaustion beneath his eyes. Outside, the city hummed distantly. Traffic murmuring. A siren somewhere far enough away to feel disconnected from his reality. On the website, his parents looked flawless. His father stood at podiums in tailored suits, hand raised mid-gesture, as if conducting applause. His mother leaned toward children with perfectly timed compassion, fingertips resting lightly on small shoulders for the cameras. Beneath the images were captions filled with words like integrity, transparency, service. Daniel stared at the word transparency until it blurred. Every image felt staged now. Every smile rehearsed. Flashback. He was 12 years old, standing beside his parents at a winter fundraiser. Snow had dusted the edges of the venue's stone steps. Inside, chandeliers shimmered above polished marble floors. His father's hand had rested on his shoulder, not gently, firm, anchoring. Smile, his father whispered through clenched teeth without turning his head. Daniel remembered the pressure of those fingers. The silent command. He had smiled, because that was what sons did. Back in the apartment, Daniel exhaled slowly and clicked into the foundation's public financial disclosures. The numbers displayed were clean, rounded, predictable, but he knew better now. He reached into the envelope from his grandmother and pulled out the copied records. Paper scraped softly against paper as he spread them across the folding table. Under the overhead bulb, the ink looked darker, more serious. Transfers routed through shell accounts. Consulting fees paid to non-existent firms. Entire grants approved, then redirected. Daniel's fingers traced the columns, his heartbeat syncing with the numbers as if they pulsed. He opened a spreadsheet on his laptop and began typing. Cross-referencing. Matching dates. The pattern emerged slowly at first. Then clearly. This wasn't random. It was architectural. Years of quiet siphoning disguised as administrative overhead. Flashback. He was 17, walking past his father's home office late at night. The door had been locked, unusual. Voices inside hushed but tense. The word allocation repeated more than once. The next month they had upgraded the house, renovated the kitchen, donated more publicly. Daniel had accepted it as success. Now he saw it as camouflage. Back in the present, his breath shortened as he reached the final page of one file. At the bottom, his mother's signature. Neat, confident, indisputable. Daniel leaned back in the folding chair. The metal legs screeched faintly against tile. He rubbed his forehead slowly, as if trying to press clarity into his skull. This wasn't small corruption. This was systemic. A machine designed to appear generous while quietly extracting. His phone buzzed against the table, vibrating sharply enough to startle him. Unknown number. Daniel stared at it for 3 seconds. 4. Then answered. Hello. A pause. Then a voice he knew better than his own. You should stop digging. His father. The sound of his voice, calm, steady, sent a cold line down Daniel's spine. You're monitoring my calls now? Daniel asked, keeping his tone level. Another pause. Controlled breathing on the other end. You don't understand what you're playing with, his father said. This doesn't just affect us. Daniel felt anger flicker, sharp and immediate. You're afraid, he replied quietly. Silence. Longer this time. The faint hum of his laptop fan filled the space between them. You think this is about money, his father continued. It's about stability, partnerships, relationships that took decades to build. On lies. Daniel shot back. His father's voice lowered slightly. You're naive. And then the line went dead. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. The apartment felt smaller. The walls closer. The air heavier. He replayed the words. This doesn't just affect us. That wasn't a denial. That was a warning. Daniel stood and walked toward the window. The street below was mostly empty, illuminated by pale sodium lights. A man walked a dog on the opposite sidewalk. Ordinary life continuing. unaware of the fracture opening beneath it. He pressed his palm lightly against the cool glass. What if his father was right? What if exposing this didn't just destroy his parents but triggered something larger? The thought unsettled him. But then another memory surfaced. Flashback. His grandmother's voice, steady and soft. Corruption survives on silence, Daniel. Not strength. He had asked her once why she seemed distant from his parents' success. She had looked toward the garden instead of answering directly. Ambition, she said finally, must be anchored to something moral. Otherwise it drifts. Back in the apartment, Daniel turned away from the window. Cause and effect. If he stayed silent, the foundation would continue diverting funds. Real families would continue receiving less. Scholarships would vanish before reaching students who needed them. If he acted, he risked retaliation, isolation, danger. He returned to the table and stared at the papers again. There were names attached to certain transfers he didn't recognize. Corporate donors. Private firms. One in particular appeared repeatedly across several years. Daniel circled it with a pin. A faint knock sounded from somewhere in the building. A neighbor's door closing. His body reacted instantly, tension spiking. He forced himself to breathe. He wasn't paranoid. Not yet. But the stakes had shifted. This was no longer about proving a point at a board meeting. This was about dismantling a network. His laptop screen dimmed slightly from inactivity. He tapped the trackpad, bringing it back to life. The smiling photos reappeared. His mother's eyes seemed to follow him from the screen. Perfect posture. Perfect composure. A lifetime of calculated optics. Daniel felt something harden inside him. Not hatred. Clarity. He began scanning and encrypting the documents, backing them up to multiple drives. Each click of the keyboard felt deliberate, irreversible. If his father was monitoring him, then the window for quiet investigation was closing. The phone call had confirmed one thing. They knew. And if they knew, they were already reacting. Daniel leaned back again, listening to the distant city sounds filtering through thin walls. This wasn't about embarrassment anymore. This wasn't even about family. This was about survival. Because if his parents were willing to disown him to protect their image, what would their partners be willing to do? A notification blinked at the corner of his screen. An email alert. From an unknown encrypted address. Subject line. You're looking at the wrong accounts. Daniel's stomach tightened. He hadn't contacted anyone yet. He hadn't shared the files. Which meant one thing. Someone else was watching too. And they had just made the first move. The car had been parked outside his building all morning. Black sedan. Tinted windows. Engine off. Patient. It wasn't there by accident. Daniel noticed it at 8:12 a.m. when he pulled back the thin curtain of his apartment window just enough to let in the gray light of morning. The sky hung low and heavy, clouds pressing down on the city like a warning. The sedan sat across the street beneath a dying oak tree, its surface reflecting the dull silver of the overcast sky. No movement inside. No license plate visible from his angle. Still. Watching. Daniel let the curtain fall back into place, his fingers lingering on the fabric longer than necessary. His chest tightened, not panic, not yet, but awareness. The kind that sharpens your senses. He told himself it was coincidence. Delivery driver. Neighbor's visitor. Private ride service. But when he left the building 20 minutes later, the car remained. He pretended not to notice. That was important. He adjusted the strap of his backpack, locked his apartment door carefully, and walked toward the corner cafe. Each step felt deliberate, controlled. He could feel it, that invisible line connecting him to the sedan. The cafe bell chimed softly as he entered. Warm air greeted him, heavy with the scent of roasted beans and cinnamon. The low murmur of conversation wrapped around him like normalcy, trying to convince him everything was fine. He ordered coffee. Black. His hands trembled slightly when he reached for his wallet. He masked it by adjusting his sleeve. He chose a seat near the window, not directly exposed, but with a clear view. The sedan remained where it had been. A faint reflection moved behind the tinted glass. Or maybe it didn't. Fear crept in slowly. Cold. Precise. His grandmother's letter replayed in his mind. They will protect their image at any cost. He remembered the way she had written those words, the slight indentation in the paper from the pressure of her pen. She had known. She had understood the lengths ambition could stretch. Daniel took a sip of his coffee. It burned his tongue, grounding him in the present. He stayed for 20 minutes. Long enough to observe. Long enough to confirm. When he left the cafe and turned back toward his building, the sedan's engine turned over with a low, controlled hum. It followed. Not aggressively. Not close enough to draw attention. Just present. Daniel's heartbeat accelerated. His breath shortened, but he kept walking, shoulders relaxed, gaze forward. He refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing fear. Inside the building, he avoided the elevator and took the stairs instead. Each step echoed louder than usual in the narrow stairwell. He unlocked his apartment door quickly, stepped inside and shut it firmly. Silence. He stood there for several seconds listening. Nothing. No footsteps in the hallway. No knock. Yet. His phone buzzed in his hand. Unknown number. Again. He stared at the screen. Then a message notification appeared. An image. His breath caught. It was a photo of his apartment door. Taken from inside the hallway. Recent. The timestamp read 9:04 a.m. Daniel's pulse slammed against his ribs. Another message followed. 2 words. Drop it. His hands shook now. Not violently. Just enough to betray adrenaline surging through his veins. He moved slowly toward the window again and parted the curtain slightly. The sedan remained parked across the street. They weren't hiding anymore. They were signaling. Flashback. He was 13 years old, sitting across from his grandmother at her small oak table. A chessboard between them. Sunlight streaming through lace curtains. He had been losing. Frustrated. I'm cornered, he muttered. She smiled softly and moved her queen forward with steady fingers. When cornered, she said gently, don't retreat. Think 3 moves ahead. He had frowned. But what if they're stronger? She leaned closer. Then you make them underestimate you. Back in the apartment, Daniel exhaled slowly. Fear was there. But beneath it, resolve. They wanted intimidation. Silence. Compliance. Instead, they had just confirmed the threat was real. And real threats leave evidence. He locked the door again, this time double-checking the deadbolt. Then he moved to his folding table and opened his laptop. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the scattered documents like a spotlight on truth. If they were watching, time was shrinking. He couldn't fight this alone. He searched his email contacts and found the name he'd been considering for days. Lena Morales. Investigative journalist. They had met once at a university panel discussion. She had spoken about nonprofit corruption with controlled intensity. After the event, she had given him a card. If you ever see something that doesn't add up, she had said, don't sit on it. He opened a new email. Subject line. Evidence of major charity fraud. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Then began typing. Clear. Direct. Factual. He attached scanned documents, spreadsheets, copies of the will clause from his grandmother. He encrypted the file. Outside, the sedan's engine started again. A low vibration reached his window faintly. Daniel paused mid-sentence. His breath slowed deliberately. This was the point of no return. Once he sent this, there was no reclaiming anonymity. No repairing family ties. No quiet resolution. His phone buzzed again. Another message. No one will believe you. He stared at the words and felt something unexpected. Calm. They were trying too hard. Which meant they were afraid. Daniel finished the email. Reread it once. Twice. He imagined his father's controlled expression cracking under federal questioning. Imagined his mother's perfect posture trembling under scrutiny. Imagined the scholarships that would finally reach real students. The cause and effect lined up clearly in his mind. Silence protects corruption. Exposure threatens it. The sedan's engine revved slightly, then idled. Waiting. Daniel moved his cursor over the send button. His grandmother's voice echoed softly in memory. Courage over comfort. He clicked. Sent. The email whooshed away into digital space, irreversible. Outside, the sedan pulled slowly away from the curb. No screeching tires. No dramatic exit. Just quiet retreat. Daniel stood motionless for a moment, listening to the fading hum of the engine. The silence that followed felt different. He wasn't being watched anymore. He was being escalated. Within seconds, a reply notification appeared on his screen. From Lena Morales. 2 words. Call me. Daniel swallowed. The game had shifted. He had just made his move. And somewhere behind dark windows and powerful offices, someone realized the threat they had dismissed had just gone public. The article dropped at 6:03 a.m. Not 6 o'clock. Not 6:05. 6:03. Daniel would remember that detail for the rest of his life. The sky outside his apartment window was still bruised with early dawn, a thin gray light stretching across the buildings like something fragile about to break. The city hadn't fully awakened yet. Delivery trucks groaned in the distance. A siren wailed somewhere far off, fading into silence. Then his phone began to vibrate. Once, twice, then nonstop. He was already awake. He hadn't slept at all. The laptop screen glowed against his pale face. The investigative journalist's website loaded and refreshed again and again until the headline appeared. Beloved charity under federal investigation. Below it, a subheading. Millions missing. Shell accounts exposed. Daniel's breath left him in a slow, unsteady exhale. It was real. The piece was detailed. Ruthless. Surgical. Screenshots of financial records. Transfers traced across borders. Anonymous sources confirming internal manipulation. His attachments, every document he'd sent, woven into a narrative that felt both clinical and explosive. His phone buzzed again. Messages flooded in. Former classmates. Distant relatives. Unknown numbers. Some asking if it was true. Some accusing him of betrayal. Some threatening. He turned the phone face down on the table. Outside, the city began to wake. And inside a downtown high-rise building wrapped in glass and reputation, federal agents were walking through the doors of the Hayes Family Outreach Foundation. The news channels moved fast. By 7:15 a.m., footage streamed live. Daniel sat on the edge of his couch, hands clasped between his knees, watching his own past unravel in high definition. Black SUVs lined the curb. Agents in dark jackets moved with controlled urgency. Employees stood outside in confused clusters, whispering, some crying. A reporter's voice cut through the morning air. Authorities have confirmed an ongoing investigation into alleged financial misconduct within the Hayes Family Outreach Foundation, a charity long regarded as a pillar of philanthropic integrity. The camera shifted. And there she was. His mother. Escorted down the steps. Her posture, once permanently poised, now bent slightly inward. Her face drained of its usual polished confidence. No makeup strong enough to mask the tremor in her jaw. For the first time in his life she looked small. Human. Not the commanding woman who orchestrated galas with a single raised eyebrow. Not the strategist who could silence a boardroom with a glance. Just human. Daniel expected triumph. Vindication. Instead he felt hollow. A cavern inside his chest where anger used to live. His mind flashed backward. A childhood memory. He was 8. Sitting backstage at a fundraiser. His mother kneeling in front of him, adjusting his tie. Perception is everything, she had whispered. People see what we show them. Her hands had been gentle. Her smile warm. Now he wondered how much of that had been performance too. A knock shattered the memory. 3 firm raps on his apartment door. Daniel froze. Another knock. Measured. Official. He stood slowly, every step toward the door heavy with possibility. Through the peephole he saw dark suits. Badges. He opened it. 2 agents. A woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and controlled calm. A younger man beside her, silent but observant. Daniel Hayes, the woman asked. He nodded. We need you to come with us. His pulse spiked, hammering in his ears. Am I under arrest? The question came out smaller than he intended. No, she replied evenly. You're a witness. Witness. The word felt fragile. Relief washed over him, brief and shallow. Then dread followed immediately behind it. If he was a witness, that meant there was a case. A real one. He grabbed his jacket. His phone. Hesitated before locking the door behind him. The hallway felt longer than usual. In the elevator, silence pressed between them. The agent's reflection in the mirrored walls seemed distant, clinical. Daniel caught his own reflection too. Dark circles under his eyes. A man who had just detonated his own family. Outside, cameras were already gathering around the building. Word spread fast. A journalist shouted his name as they moved him into the unmarked vehicle. He kept his eyes forward. The ride was quiet. The city moved past the tinted windows. People heading to work, unaware of the tectonic shift unfolding behind closed doors. Inside the federal building, fluorescent lights hummed faintly. The air smelled sterile. Processed. They led him into an interrogation room. Metal table. 2 chairs. A camera in the corner. The agent sat across from him. The younger one remained standing near the wall. "You did the right thing," she began. Daniel swallowed. "Did I?" She studied him carefully. "Your information accelerated a process already in motion. But what you uncovered, it confirmed scope." "Scope?" he repeated. She slid a file across the table. Inside were more documents. Names he didn't recognize. Companies layered beneath companies. Offshore accounts. Transfers larger than anything he had seen. His throat tightened. "I thought it was just them," he whispered. "My parents." The agent's expression didn't change. They weren't acting alone. The words settled like ice in his stomach. "There are board members. External partners. Financial institutions looking the other way. Political donors with vested interests." Daniel blinked. The foundation wasn't just a charity. It was a network. "And now?" he asked quietly. The agent leaned back slightly. Now they know someone inside turned. The room felt smaller. "They're not happy," she continued. "And when powerful people feel threatened, they don't always react predictably." Daniel's grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. When cornered, think 3 moves ahead. He had sent the email. He had exposed the fraud. He had moved the queen. But he hadn't seen the entire board. A flash of realization struck him, the black sedan. The message. "Drop it." His chest tightened. "They were already watching me," he said. The agent's eyes sharpened. "Tell me everything." So he did. The car. The photo of his apartment door. The call from his father. The warning. As he spoke, something shifted inside him. Fear remained. But it was no longer paralyzing. It was clarifying. The agent closed the file slowly. "We can offer protective measures," she said. "But understand this. This investigation will go public in ways you can't control." Daniel let out a shaky breath. "My life's already public." She gave a faint, almost sympathetic nod. As they escorted him out, he caught a glimpse of a television mounted in the hallway. His father now appeared on screen. Escorted in handcuffs. For the briefest second, their eyes met through the camera lens. Or maybe Daniel just imagined it. Back in the car, the city no longer looked ordinary. It looked layered. Complicit. Watching. His phone buzzed again in his pocket. This time he didn't ignore it. A single message from an unknown number. No words. Just a chess piece emoji. A black king. Daniel stared at it. His heartbeat slowed. Not from calm but from understanding. This wasn't over. Not even close. He had exposed corruption. But exposure was only the first move. And somewhere in the shadows of power and reputation, others were already planning their response. The board was larger than he imagined. And the real game had just begun. Names surfaced. Not just names whispered in corridors or buried in financial footnotes. Big names. Politicians. Corporate donors. Silent partners who had smiled for cameras, while their signatures redirected millions into shadow accounts. The foundation hadn't just been corrupt. It had been a laundering machine. Daniel sat alone in a dim federal office, the kind of room designed for analysis rather than comfort. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with a faint electrical hum, flickering just slightly, as if even they were unsure how long they could hold steady. In front of him stretched a corkboard covered in photographs, faces pinned in neat rows, red string connecting them in sharp, intersecting lines. His father's photo sat near the center. Immaculate suit, confident smile. The image taken from a charity gala 2 years ago. Crystal chandeliers glowing behind him, champagne glass lifted mid-toast. But now Daniel saw something else in that smile. Calculation. Positioning. He leaned forward in his chair, elbows resting on his knees. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and paper. His fingers trembled slightly as he traced one of the red strings with his eyes, from his father's image to a state senator, from the senator to a logistics firm, from the firm to a series of offshore accounts. His father was just a piece. A well-dressed piece. Flashback. A beach resort years ago. Daniel was 15. Suitcase packed. Boarding passes printed. He had been excited, his first real vacation in years. Then the call came. His father had stepped into another room, voice lowered but urgent. When he returned, his expression had hardened. "Business emergency," he said. "Trips cancelled." Daniel remembered the way his mother didn't argue, didn't question. She simply began unpacking. Back then he'd felt disappointed. Now he understood. Business emergency had meant money moving. It had meant risk. It had meant someone else on this board tightening the strings. A chair scraped softly across the floor behind him. Agent Morales stepped closer. Her presence was calm but deliberate, like someone who knew exactly how much weight each word carried. "You're brave," she said quietly. Daniel didn't look at her immediately. His gaze stayed on the board. "But bravery has consequences." There was no comfort in her tone. Only truth. He nodded slowly. "I already lost my family," he murmured. His voice sounded distant, even to himself. "What else is there to take?" Morales studied him carefully, as if measuring how much pressure he could withstand before fracturing. "Reputation," she said. "Freedom. Safety." Each word landed heavier than the last. Before Daniel could respond, his phone vibrated against the metal table beside him. The sound seemed too loud in the quiet room. He glanced down. A news alert. His stomach tightened before he even opened it. He tapped the screen. A live press conference. His parents stood behind a podium emblazoned with the foundation's logo. Still intact, still polished, as if the scandal were merely a misunderstanding. His mother spoke first. Her voice steady. Controlled. "Our son has fabricated evidence in an attempt to damage our life's work." Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. Fabricated. The word echoed. His father stood beside her, solemn, wounded, playing the role perfectly. A father betrayed by his own child. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. "We are victims of a malicious smear campaign," his father added. "Victims." Daniel's hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles whitened. Flashback. He was 12 again, standing beside his father at a fundraiser. His father's grip on his shoulder too tight. "Smile," he had whispered through clenched teeth. Daniel had smiled. "Because that was what you did when your family told you to. You performed. You protected the image. Now they were sacrificing him. Again. The difference was he wasn't a child anymore. And he wasn't powerless." Morales watched the press conference over his shoulder. Her jaw tightened slightly. "They're positioning for public sympathy," she said. "If they can discredit you, they weaken the investigation." Daniel swallowed hard. "They taught me how to lie," he said quietly. "I know exactly how they're doing this." A flicker of something crossed her expression. "Respect, maybe. You also know their weaknesses." He hesitated. Weaknesses. His father's temper when control slipped. His mother's fear of exposure in private circles. Their obsession with perception. His phone vibrated again. A text this time. Unknown number. "You should have stayed quiet." The message was followed by a photo. His grandmother's house. Taken from across the street. Daniel's pulse spiked violently. The room seemed to tilt for a second. "They're escalating," he whispered. Morales leaned closer, eyes narrowing as she read the screen. "Forward that to me." He did. His grandmother. The only one who had ever hinted that something wasn't right. The only one who had warned him. They will protect their image at any cost. The fluorescent light above flickered again, briefly plunging the room into a dim half-shadow before stabilizing. Daniel stood abruptly, pacing once across the narrow space. "They're trying to isolate me," he said. "Turn public opinion. Intimidate witnesses." He stopped in front of the board. The red string suddenly looked less like connections and more like a trap. "This isn't just about money," he continued. It's about power, influence, elections maybe, policy. Morales didn't deny it. There are sealed investigations connected to some of those names, she said carefully. Your evidence could open doors. Or get people killed, Daniel replied. Silence stretched between them. Heavy. Measured. He thought of his grandmother teaching him chess at her kitchen table. The faint smell of cinnamon tea. Her voice soft but firm. When cornered, don't panic. Think 3 moves ahead. He exhaled slowly. They think they're sacrificing me to protect the network, he said. But if they attack me publicly, it gives us leverage. Morales tilted her head slightly. How? They're forcing the narrative into the open. If I respond strategically, controlled interviews, documented timelines, proof, they'll look desperate. And desperate people make mistakes, she finished. He nodded. Fear still pulsed inside him. But beneath it, resolve. The same quiet steel that had pushed him to press send on that first email. His phone buzzed once more. Another alert. A senator connected to the foundation had abruptly resigned, for personal reasons. Daniel stared at the board. One string had already snapped. The web was tightening, but it was also unraveling. He turned to Morales. I want to go on record. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. You're sure? They already called me a liar. If I stay silent now, it looks like guilt. Outside the office window, storm clouds gathered over the city skyline. Dark. Heavy. Waiting. Daniel felt the weight of it all pressing down. His parents' betrayal. The public scrutiny. The threats. But he also felt something else. Not hope. Not yet. But clarity. They had built a machine fueled by secrecy. He had introduced light. And light, once it spreads, is hard to contain. Morales gave a small nod. Then we prepare you. Daniel looked once more at his father's photo pinned to the board. For years he had believed that man was untouchable. Now he saw the cracks. Powerful people weren't invincible. They were just protected by layers. And layers could be peeled back. Slowly. Deliberately. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. The storm was coming. And this time, Daniel wasn't standing alone beneath it. Arrests began quietly. Early morning, before the sun had fully touched the skyline, when the city felt still, unaware of the storm breaking in its midst. Daniel watched from a perch across the street, hands shoved deep in the pockets of his jacket, breath clouding in the crisp air. Then loudly, siren wails pierced the dawn. Black SUVs, unmarked but unmistakable, screeched to a halt outside the house he had grown up in. Federal agents moved with precision, doors slamming, boots hitting the pavement in a synchronized rhythm. The neighbors emerged, pulling on robes, shaking heads, whispering in clusters that quickly became murmurs of fear and fascination. Assets frozen. Accounts seized. The foundation's sparkling facade cracked in front of the world. Daniel had anticipated this. Yet, seeing it unfold so tangibly, the weight of it pressed into his chest. He remembered the house in another light. A time when it smelled of cinnamon and roast chicken. When laughter bounced off the walls with genuine warmth. Flashback, his 10th birthday. Balloons hung crookedly. His father lifting him into the air with a laugh that seemed infinite at the time. His mother snapping photos, smiling in a way that felt real. The dining room now stood empty. Curtains drawn tight. Shadows stretching across walls that had witnessed both love and deception. His father was the first to appear at the front door. Hands cuffed behind him. His once imposing posture slumped under the weight of the law. Their eyes met for a split second. Daniel felt a rush of emotions. Anger, relief, a fragile tug of grief. There was no apology in that gaze. Only resentment. Tears threatened, but not for the man his father had become. The schemer, the orchestrator of false smiles and hidden accounts. Daniel wept for the father he had wished he had. The man who could have been a protector instead of a manipulator. His mother, meticulous and composed, slipped out the side entrance, avoiding the glare of cameras entirely. Her heels clicked softly against the pavement, a sound that now seemed like an echo from another life. One Daniel had never truly lived in. Rumors erupted instantly. Social media lit up. News channels ran footage of the raid on loop. Friends, colleagues, strangers, they all offered their own judgment in real time. Betrayal sells. Daniel understood that better than anyone. But justice, real justice, takes time. And time, he had learned, demands patience, strategy, and occasionally sacrifice. He watched as agents went room to room, documenting, photographing, cataloging. The kitchen, the library, the home office with its polished mahogany desk. Every surface touched, every drawer opened, every secret exposed. Daniel's mind flickered to the hidden drawer under the false bottom of his father's desk, the one he had once opened as a curious teenager, finding nothing more than old receipts. Now, he wondered if evidence had been placed there deliberately, waiting for the right moment to surface. A neighbor whispered to another, "I can't believe it. They're really taking them down." Another shook her head, murmuring, "After everything they did for this neighborhood." Daniel realized that to outsiders, this would seem like poetic justice, a wealthy family finally held accountable. But he knew better. He knew the layers beneath the layers, the powerful allies, the hidden investments, the strings that had always extended beyond the city limits. Flashback. Daniel's first visit to the foundation office as a teenager. He had followed his father behind a velvet rope, past trophy cases and plaques celebrating philanthropy. His father had whispered, "Perception is the only reality." He had not understood then. Now every word rang clear, bitter, and precise. The agents led his father down the front steps. Cameras flashed. A neighbor's dog barked incessantly. Daniel's father's expression was rigid, controlled, but there was something fleeting in his eyes, a glimpse of fear, a recognition of the life that had collapsed around him. Daniel's mother emerged a moment later, carefully composed, her coat wrapped tightly around her. No handcuffs, no indictment in public view. Yet the damage had been done. Her carefully cultivated image was cracking, though she moved with the precision of someone who refused to let it show. He remembered the whispered words from his grandmother's letter. They will protect their image at any cost. And now Daniel understood fully. They had always been performers. Every gala, every smile, every handshake, it had been a mask. And when the mask slipped, the world watched. Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from Agent Morales. "We need to review the evidence one last time. Come to the office." He pocketed the device, taking one last look at the house he had once called home. The yard, the familiar tree in the corner, the steps he had run down countless times, all silent witnesses. He walked slowly, deliberately, leaving the neighborhood that had molded him but also constrained him. Inside the office, the hum of fluorescent lights was replaced by a quieter, more deliberate tension. Morales met him at the door, her expression measured. "They're securing everything," she said. "But there's still work to do." Daniel exhaled, letting the tension leave his shoulders in a slow, controlled release. He had watched the powerful topple, at least partially. But this was only the beginning. The arrests were symbolic. A necessary first move in a far larger game. "Are you ready?" Morales asked. He nodded, though readiness was a fragile concept in moments like this. "Because exposure alone isn't justice," she continued. "You'll need to testify, provide insight, anticipate moves. And they'll try to manipulate public perception. Every step will be scrutinized." Daniel's gaze fell to the table, where files from the raid were being organized. Red folders marked evidence sat neatly stacked, each a testament to years of hidden maneuvering, deception, and betrayal. He thought of the chessboard his grandmother had taught him to play. Pawns, knights, bishops, all controlled by strategy, patience, foresight. His parents had played the game for decades. He had just moved a piece that changed everything. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had happened. Morning commuters rushed by, the sun climbing higher, indifferent. But Daniel knew the truth. The Foundation's empire was cracking, and lives would be altered forever. And somewhere in the shadows there were still players watching, calculating, waiting for the next move. Daniel exhaled slowly. Justice had begun. But it demanded vigilance. And vigilance, he realized, came with its own cost. He lifted his head, eyes focused, breath steadying. The storm outside was not yet over. It had only just begun. And Daniel was ready. The house, the family, the empire, it was all unraveling. And in the silence that followed, he understood one immutable truth. Justice always demands something in return. And he was prepared to pay. The sun broke fully over the horizon, casting light over a city unaware that a reckoning had begun. But Daniel was wide awake. The game had entered its next phase. And this time he held the board in his hands. The threats didn't stop. Not after the raids. Not after the arrests. Not even after Daniel thought he had finally gained a foothold. They came quietly at first, almost imperceptibly, like whispers in the dark. Anonymous emails carefully crafted, each line a dagger hidden behind neutral fonts. The messages weren't vulgar. They didn't need to be. They simply reminded him of what was at stake. We see you. Think carefully before you act. Some truths are better left buried. Then the calls began. Late-night rings that pierced the silence. A voice on the other end, too calm, too measured. No name. No introduction. Just a tone that suggested authority and threat simultaneously. A faint click before the line went dead, leaving Daniel alone with his racing heartbeat. He tried to rationalize. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was someone else entirely. But deep down he knew. He had exposed power. And power never forgives. One evening, Daniel returned home after a long day of preparing testimony and reviewing documents with Agent Morales. His apartment, small, bare, intentionally minimalist, should have felt safe. A sanctuary of sorts. But the moment he stepped through the door, a chill hit him. The space felt wrong. Books strewn across the floor. Drawers yanked open. Papers scattered like leaves in a storm. Nothing stolen. Nothing taken. Just a message. Spray-painted in jagged black letters across the main wall of his living room. Family is forever. His breath caught. His chest tightened. The words weren't just a threat, they were a declaration. A reminder. A warning. He dropped his bag, fingers trembling, and ran his hand over the cold letters. The wall seemed to vibrate under his touch, echoing with every memory he had tried to bury. Dinners with laughter that now felt hollow, birthday cakes he had blown out wishing for a family he didn't have, the smile of his grandmother who had been the only one to see him clearly. Daniel's phone buzzed incessantly. Agent Morales, the security team, the law enforcement contact he had been assigned, everyone alert, everyone on edge. The agents increased protection immediately. Door locks were reinforced. Cameras installed. Patrols scheduled. Every window monitored. But protection doesn't silence fear. It only gives it a stage to grow louder. At 2 a.m., Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his sparsely furnished apartment. The hum of the overhead bulb was a monotonous lullaby, each flicker making his heart skip. Shadows stretched along the walls, as if the message was moving, breathing, waiting. He thought about the decisions he had made. Every choice, every risk, every step toward exposing his parents' empire had led here. And now he wondered, was it worth it? Was exposing them, the lies, the corruption, the betrayal, truly worth this constant shadow? This creeping paranoia that clawed at his chest every time he closed his eyes? He closed his eyes anyway. And he saw her. His grandmother. Eleanor Hayes. Her smile warm and knowing. A smile that had always reminded him that truth mattered more than comfort. That courage, even in the face of impossible odds, was necessary. He whispered into the dark, a soft but determined vow. Yes. The words hung in the room, fragile but resolute, as if challenging the shadows themselves. But somewhere beyond the walls of his apartment, someone else had already made a decision. And it wasn't in his favor. The next morning the city was bright and different. But Daniel knew the darkness had arrived again. Footsteps outside, faint but deliberate. A car parked too long at the corner, engine off. A silhouette watching from across the street. He moved carefully, noting every detail. Each pattern, each anomaly became a potential warning. He tried to maintain his routine, coffee from the same cafe, emails sent on schedule, evidence organized meticulously. But paranoia was a constant companion now. A shadow that mirrored every thought, every fear. Flashback. Daniel at 12, hiding behind the curtains in the very dining room where his family had celebrated holidays and birthdays. He had overheard arguments, threats whispered behind closed doors, the subtle ways his parents manipulated appearances for social gain. Back then he had been powerless, just a child. Now he carried all that knowledge as both armor and burden. The spray-painted message haunted him. It wasn't just about fear of physical harm. It was a reminder that even when the law intervened, influence and loyalty ran deep. Networks of protection, allies who moved silently, unseen. Power didn't disappear with arrests. It adapted, shifted, and retaliated. Daniel paced, running a hand over his hair. He glanced at the stack of files on the table, emails, bank records, recorded conversations, photographs. Everything meticulously gathered. Everything ready for the next stage. Yet preparation could not erase the human response. The adrenaline, the rush of unease that surged through him whenever he heard a door creak, a car engine idle too long, a shadow move. Agent Morales entered silently, holding a steaming cup of coffee. She didn't speak immediately, letting Daniel gather himself. The quiet between them was loaded, tense, electric. "They know you're serious," she said finally, voice measured. "They've escalated. They want to scare you. They want you to hesitate." Daniel took a slow breath. He looked at the spray-painted wall again, almost instinctively. The words had become part of the room now, an uninvited mural of menace. "I won't," he said quietly. "I won't back down. Not now." Morales nodded, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Good. But remember, you're not alone. Every move they make we're monitoring. Every step documented. They may be dangerous, but so are you now." That night, Daniel sat on the floor back against the wall, staring at the message one last time. Each letter seemed alive, a shadow with teeth, a ghost of the family he had lost. But he whispered again, louder this time to himself, to the memory of his grandmother. "Yes, I will continue. I will see this through, even if it costs me everything." Somewhere outside, someone was already planning the next move. A retaliatory strike meant to unsettle, to intimidate, to silence. But Daniel had made his choice. He had accepted the risks. And in the darkness of his apartment, he prepared for the storm he knew was coming. Because someone had decided it wasn't in his favor. And he was ready to meet it head-on. The clock ticked toward 3 a.m., each second a drumbeat of inevitability. The city slept unaware, while shadows and whispers circled Daniel's life. Outside, a faint breeze carried the scent of rain, cool and foreboding. The night was far from over. And Daniel, alone but resolute, closed his eyes one final time before the inevitable confrontation, feeling the weight of both fear and courage settle within him. He would not be broken. He could not be. Because some truths demanded exposure. And some threats, no matter how dark, would not dictate his destiny. The storm was coming. And Daniel had already chosen to stand in it. The next move was theirs. But the response, Daniel knew, would be his. And he was ready. The courtroom was silent. Not the polite hush of civility. Not the quiet that accompanies expectation. This was a silence that carried the weight of judgment, history, and betrayal. Every tick of the clock on the wall echoed like a drumbeat of inevitability. Daniel sat at the witness stand, palms pressed flat against the polished wood, knuckles white. The air smelled faintly of polished oak and old paper, a smell that somehow carried both authority and accusation. Across the room, his parents sat side by side. The elegance and poise that once defined them, pristine suits, crisp collars, calculated smiles, were gone. Now they were just defendants. Their posture rigid, their expressions strained. His mother, for the first time in years, looked vulnerable. Her eyes met his across the courtroom. "Why?" she mouthed. No sound, just the silent question hanging in the air like smoke. Daniel held her gaze. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with clarity. "Because you chose reputation over me. Because you preferred the illusion of perfection to the reality of family. Because truth mattered more than appearances." The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Hayes, please state your testimony." Daniel exhaled slowly. The first words trembled. His voice quivered as if the weight of years, secrets, and betrayal were pressing down on him. But he steadied, paused. Let the silence build tension. Let the room feel the gravity of what he was about to reveal. "I've lived with lies for too long," he began. "And I can no longer stay silent." Flashback. Daniel at 12, standing in the corner of the dining room while his father argued with a donor. His mother whispering reassurances that were anything but comforting. The charity had been a facade then, but he hadn't known it. He had trusted. He had smiled. He had believed. Until the documents, the evidence, the letters from his grandmother that finally opened his eyes. Back in the present, he detailed the evidence methodically. Each document, each transfer, Each misappropriated donation unfolded like a thread pulling the fabric of their carefully curated lives apart. Bank statements, emails, shell companies, everything meticulously logged, every fact checked. His voice grew steadier with each revelation. Funds meant for children's education, he said, glancing briefly at the gallery, were redirected through accounts we could never have imagined. And the people responsible sat here pretending to serve, pretending to care. His mother shifted in her seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, fingers twisting, nails digging into her skin. There was no denial, not yet. Only a flicker of panic. Daniel paused. Let the room breathe. Let the weight of the words sink in. Journalists leaned forward, pens poised. The public watching on monitors beyond the courtroom could feel the tension through every frame. He continued. Names, dates, amounts, all precise, all undeniable. His father's jaw tightened with each statement, veins standing out along his temple. His mother's eyes darted toward him, a mixture of disbelief and regret, but also calculation. Always calculation. Even now, even as the walls closed in, she sought a way to maintain control. Flashback. Eleanor Hayes' grandmother, teaching him about courage. Truth has weight, she had said softly, and those who hide from it will eventually collapse under their own lies. Daniel felt that weight now. But he also felt something else, liberation. The liberation of finally speaking what had been kept in shadows. The empowerment of dismantling the illusion with words, facts, and unwavering courage. Accountability, he said firmly, is not optional. It is owed. Not to me, but to every life affected by deception. A hush fell. The gallery, the press, the attorneys, all silent. Even the court reporters, fingers poised over their keyboards, seemed to hold their breath. The evidence had spoken. The narrative had shifted. His parents exchanged a glance. No whispered words. No whispered pleas. Only the raw, naked realization that control had slipped through their fingers. Daniel's voice softened slightly. I am not here for revenge. I am here for truth. Flashback. The first time he had confronted his parents about discrepancies. The first time they dismissed him with cold smiles and empty threats. The sting of rejection, the loneliness, the disbelief. Every moment had led to this stand. Every lie, every concealment, every betrayal now facing exposure. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly, a mixture of curiosity and authority. You understand the seriousness of your statements? I do, Daniel replied. Each word deliberate, each pause weighted with meaning. And I understand the consequences. I am prepared to face them, but I will not let fear dictate silence. Not anymore. A shift occurred. The public, the court, the very atmosphere seemed to change. The power his parents wielded for years, the unspoken social leverage, the silent fear, the curated image of benevolence, crumbled under the clarity of his testimony. His mother's lips parted slightly as if to speak, but no sound emerged. Her eyes glistened with moisture she tried to hide. Her facade fractured, revealing the human beneath the mask. Vulnerability, fear, recognition. Daniel felt a strange compassion amidst the triumph. Not forgiveness but understanding. The recognition that choices had consequences. That the pursuit of image over integrity had led them here. Evidence after evidence dismantled the illusion. Photographs of smiling donors juxtaposed with internal memos, transaction sheets, and audio recordings left no room for manipulation. The courtroom became a theater of truth. Each statement a blow against years of deception. His father's jaw tightened further. Every muscle rigid. A silent struggle to maintain dignity in the face of undeniable exposure. But dignity, Daniel realized, was fragile when built on deceit. The verdict would take days. Weeks perhaps. But Daniel already felt a shift. A release. A recalibration of his place in the world. He wasn't the rejected son anymore. He was the one who had endured, who had fought, who had stood unwavering in the eye of betrayal. The gallery murmured quietly as Daniel stepped down from the stand. Cameras flashed, capturing every expression, every microgesture, every fleeting emotion. Journalists scribbled notes furiously. The story would spread, ripple through society, and not be easily ignored. He glanced at his parents one last time. No hatred, no vengeance, only the solemn acknowledgement of choices made and consequences faced. They were human, flawed, and finally exposed. And he, Daniel, had become something new. A witness, a force, a voice for truth. And sometimes standing costs everything. But sometimes standing is everything. As he exited the courtroom, the sun broke through the clouds outside, casting light across the steps. A soft breeze carried the scent of rain from the night before. He breathed it in. Freedom, for the first time, felt tangible. The storm of the past had ended. And Daniel had survived. He was no longer just the boy in the corner, overlooked and silenced. He was the man who had faced betrayal, threats, and intimidation, and had spoken truth in a world desperate for lies. The courtroom doors closed behind him, and with each step down the marble stairs, he felt the weight of years lift slightly. The world was watching, yes, but now he could walk into it without fear. The verdict awaited. But Daniel already knew the outcome of the most important battle. He had stood and he had prevailed. And in the shadows of the courtroom, echoes of whispered regrets, silent apologies, and the long, fragile arc of justice lingered. Daniel smiled faintly, because sometimes standing costs everything, but sometimes it costs nothing at all. And he had chosen to stand. The storm had passed, but the memory of the tempest would never leave. The verdict came at sunset. Not the bright, forgiving kind of sunset that softens edges and warms faces. This sunset was heavy, crimson bleeding into gray, like the world itself had exhaled its final judgment. The courtroom was tense, thick with anticipation and the unspoken history that had led to this day. Daniel sat in the front row, hands folded loosely in his lap, his pulse steady but alert. Every muscle in his body held its own quiet tension, every breath measured. He had waited for this moment his entire life, though he hadn't known it until the path had forced him here. The judge cleared his throat, the gavel lifted, and the words sliced through the air like a knife. Guilty. Multiple counts. The room erupted. Some gasps, some murmurs, some hurried clicks of camera shutters from journalists capturing the moment. The echoes bounced against the high ceilings, carrying with them years of secrets, lies, and betrayal. Daniel didn't flinch. He had rehearsed the weight of this day in his mind countless times, and yet the finality of it still pressed down on him with gravity. His parents were led away in handcuffs. Their elegance, once their shield, now irrelevant. No one outside the courtroom could see the slight trembling of his mother's hand as she touched the arm of a bailiff, the rigid set of his father's jaw, the way his eyes darted briefly toward Daniel before being forced forward. Power had crumbled and exposure was absolute. Outside, the fading light bathed the courthouse steps in amber and shadow. Reporters shouted questions, cameras swung, and the hum of phones recording every detail reverberated through the plaza. Daniel didn't respond. His mind wasn't on the frenzy. It was on something else, something quieter, deeper. He descended the steps alone, each footfall deliberate, echoing softly against the marble. "You're no longer family." The words returned, haunting. They had once been a weapon, sharp and definitive, cutting through his life like a guillotine blade. Spoken by the very people who were supposed to be his foundation, they had left a scar invisible to others. But now, standing alone in the cooling light, the words carried a different resonance. They were no longer accusation or cruelty. They were liberation. Family isn't blood. He realized that now. Family was loyalty, truth, and choice. Family was the courage to stand against lies, even when it meant standing alone. His heart, tight for years with anger and grief, loosened just slightly. Not because his parents were gone, not because justice had been served, but because he had survived it. Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket, a soft vibration against his leg. He pulled it out and saw a message from the journalist he had trusted months ago. The stories inspiring others to speak up. A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corners of his lips. He looked up at the darkening sky, streaked with violet and molten gold, the clouds moving like silent witnesses to everything that had happened. The world had shifted, not because of punishment, not because of scandal, but because one person refused to disappear. Flashback. He remembered his grandmother, Eleanor Hayes, standing at the edge of her garden, sun setting behind her, her hands folded, eyes sharp yet kind. "Courage," she had said, "isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to act despite it." He felt her presence now, not as memory but as approval. A subtle warmth like a gentle hand on his shoulder, anchoring him. Her wisdom had guided him, often in silence, and now its echoes were undeniable. Daniel descended the final steps, pausing only for a moment to glance back at the courthouse. Inside, the machinery of justice continued, lawyers speaking, clerks shuffling papers, but he was outside. Free. Not in a legal sense but in a deeper, harder way. Free from the weight of expectation, deception, and fear. Free to define himself on his own terms. The reporters continued their barrage, voices overlapping. Daniel moved past them, but one word caught his attention. Inspiration. Others were hearing his story. Others were watching, waiting, imagining themselves standing in his place. The ripple effect of courage, small yet powerful, was already spreading. He turned a corner, stepping into a quieter street. The city around him buzzed with life, indifferent yet familiar. Streetlights flickered on as the sun's last remnants faded, casting pools of light and shadow across the pavement. He breathed deeply, tasting the air, feeling the cool evening brush against his skin. Flashback. Daniel's childhood bedrooms. The walls lined with books, photos, and dreams he had once believed in blindly. The laughter he had thought was genuine. The whispered promises he had clung to, all illusions. And yet, those moments had built him, had prepared him for this. Every lie he had endured, every betrayal he had faced, had forged resilience. Now, walking alone, he understood the power of choice. He had chosen to act, to speak, to expose. And in doing so, he had rewritten not just his own story, but the narrative of the family that had once claimed him. He paused by a small park, the grass damp with evening dew. A lone bench under a street lamp invited him to sit. He did, running a hand across the cold wood. The sounds of the city, distant sirens, a dog barking, a car engine starting, felt ordinary yet miraculous. Life continued and he was part of it. Not trapped by the past, not chained to the failures of others. Daniel's thoughts returned to his parents. Not in anger, not in revenge, but with clarity. He had confronted them, exposed them, and survived. Their world had collapsed, but his had opened. And he had no desire to gloat. Power over others had never been his goal. Truth had been. Courage had been. Integrity had been. He pulled out his phone again, scrolling through messages of support, emails from people inspired, strangers who had read the story and felt emboldened. The network of fear his parents had built, threats, intimidation, whispers, was unraveling. And somewhere in that unraveling he found hope. The sky darkened fully, stars beginning to pierce the twilight. The air carried the faint scent of rain from earlier, mingling with the warmth of streetlights and the distant hum of traffic. Daniel stood, feeling the weight of the day, the verdict, and the journey behind him settle into a quiet resolve. Family, he understood now, was not dictated by blood. It was chosen, nurtured, and maintained through truth. Loyalty could not be bought, nor could integrity be faked. And those who walked away from truth, regardless of blood ties, had already lost. Daniel took a final deep breath. The city stretched before him, full of stories, challenges, and possibilities. He was no longer the boy who had been disowned. He was the man who had stood, the man who had refused to vanish. And in that moment, under the quiet stars and the lingering glow of sunset, he knew he was not alone. Not in spirit, not in courage, not in the knowledge that the truth, finally spoken, could change everything. For the first time in years, Daniel smiled fully. He wasn't just surviving, he was living. And the world was watching.